I sat across from my son and his wife, the candle flickering between us, lemon bars untouched, sweet tea going cold. "It's cancer," I said, my voice steady. My daughter-in-law laughed. "Another dramatic illness, Joanne?" She smirked, looking to my son for backup. But he just stared at his phone. Not a word, not a glance. After years of raising him, after birthdays, bruises, broken hearts, I realized in that moment I was just his mother when it was easy. And now I was alone. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the dishwasher in the next room and the sound of Joanne's teaspoon clinking against her teacup. The sun had just started its descent, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor of her Nashville home. She'd made lemon bars, the ones Lily liked best, and poured everyone sweet tea. She'd even lit a candle. But the warmth of the setting couldn't soften what she was about to say. Joanne folded her hands in her lap, her posture straight. Mark sat across from her, legs jittering, checking his phone between glances. Amber perched on the arm of the couch, immaculate as ever, crossed legs, flawless lipstick, bored eyes. Lily, her 12-year-old granddaughter, sat closest. Her little hand curled around the mug of tea like it might spill if she let go. "I got the biopsy results this morning," Joanne began, voice calm, measured. "It's cancer. Stage 2. It's early, treatable. We've already got a plan in place." There was a pause. Not gasps, not worry, just air thickening. Amber blinked, then laughed, sharp, dismissive. "Are you serious? God, what is it this time?" She turned slightly toward Mark with a smirk. Didn't she think she had lupus last year? Or was that just another emotional fatigue week? Joanne didn't flinch. Not even when Amber's laugh stretched too long. Not even when Mark stayed still, eyes cast down, his silence louder than Amber's cruelty. She simply lifted her teacup again and took a small sip. It was still warm. Across from her, Lily's face fell. She blinked up at her father, then her mother, and then slowly stood, walking to Joanne's side. The girl wrapped her arms around her waist with the kind of urgency children save for moments they don't know how to name. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered, small voice barely audible. Joanne placed a gentle hand on Lily's back. "It's all right, sweetheart." Amber crossed her legs tighter, clearly annoyed by the silence stretching around her joke. "Look, I'm just saying, it always sounds dramatic at first. Let's not spiral." Joanne gave no reply. She didn't scold, didn't shout. Instead, she calmly removed Lily's arms, kissed her on the crown of her head, and stood. "Thank you both for coming," she said, still serene. "That's all I wanted to share." Mark stood slowly, awkward. "Mom, if there's anything we can—" "There isn't," she said, cutting gently but with finality. Amber tugged at his sleeve. "We've got to go anyway. Reservation at 8. Joanne followed them to the door, held it open, and watched them step into the dusk. The sound of Amber's heels on the front steps faded into nothing. She didn't cry. Instead, she went back inside, rinsed the mugs in the sink, and blew out the candle. She wrapped the untouched lemon bars in foil and placed them carefully in the fridge. Then she walked into her bedroom, pulled out the drawer in her nightstand, and lifted a blank yellow legal pad from beneath her planner. She sat at her desk, picked up a pen, and in clean, deliberate handwriting, wrote 2 words at the top of the page. "No more." She underlined it once. No flourish, no punctuation, just a declaration. From the hallway, the faint echo of Lily's apology lingered in the air. Joanne tapped her pen against the pad once, then started a list. By the end of the night, the page had names, bullet points, crossed-out contacts, and legal notes she remembered from helping organize the school library's trust accounts. Her handwriting didn't shake once. They had treated her illness like an inconvenience. She would treat their presence the same way. The porch light stayed off that Sunday. For the first time in 17 years, the smell of roasted chicken didn't float from Joanne's kitchen into the street. The blinds remained drawn. No place settings. No pitcher of tea sweating on the table. No dessert cooling on the counter. At exactly 11:03 a.m., she sent the group text. Sunday dinners are canceled until further notice. Take care. No explanation. No invitation to ask why. She placed the phone down on the counter, turned off notifications, and kept slicing strawberries for her own breakfast. Just one plate. Hers. Natalie arrived 15 minutes later with a clipboard, 2 iced coffees, and a voice that cut cleaner than any scalpel. "You ready to do this?" she asked, walking in like she always had. No knocking, just familiarity. Joanne nodded. No time to waste. They spread paperwork across the kitchen table, appointment schedules, lab dates, medication cycles. Joanne had already color-coded her binder tabs. Old librarian habits died hard. Natalie, ever the realist, laid out what chemo might do to her body. No sugarcoating. "The fatigue will hit first," Natalie said, tapping the 3rd week in the binder. "Then the nausea, and the hair, usually by week 5. But your numbers are solid. We're not giving up any ground." Joanne didn't flinch. "Good." They talked through transport, groceries, even end-of-life documents. It was Natalie who asked gently, "You want to list Mark as your emergency contact?" Joanne didn't hesitate. "No." Natalie blinked once, then nodded. "Then who?" "You." It wasn't a gesture. It was a verdict. She updated her medical forms that night. Under family, she skipped 2 names. When Lily's message came in the next morning, Joanne had just finished filing away her insurance pre-approvals. "Lily, Mom says we're not coming by for a while. Can I still see you?" Joanne stared at the screen for a long moment, thumb hovering. Then she typed slowly, carefully. "Joanne, always." The screen lit up a few seconds later with a heart emoji. Joanne didn't reply, but she smiled into the quiet. She pulled out her journal later that evening, wrote the date in her precise cursive, then underlined it once. They laughed. I logged it. Her handwriting didn't waver, even as the hum of solitude thickened around her. The morning of her first treatment was gray-skied and cool. She wore a navy cardigan, brought her own blanket, and carried a crossword puzzle tucked into her purse. Natalie drove them to the infusion center, parallel parked like a city girl, and walked her inside without a word. The nurse asked, "Do you have any family joining you today?" Joanne answered evenly. "My friend is enough." Inside the infusion bay, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and artificial lemon cleaner. The chair was recliner style, the armrests padded, the windows looking out at a thin strip of parking lot hedges. She settled in with a sigh, letting the IV needle slide in like a whisper. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she looked out the window, watched a cardinal hop along the hedge, and thought, not of Amber's laugh, or Mark's silence, but of Lily's arms around her waist and the soft weight of love that didn't require a performance. When they returned home that afternoon, Joanne heated leftover soup, wrote in her journal again, and tucked herself under a fleece throw as Natalie sorted pills into a weekly organizer beside her. Later that night, she reached for her phone to check the weather and saw a notification. Amber had posted a photo to her story, fresh manicured nails, a mimosa glass, and the caption, "Some people love drama." Joanne didn't respond. She didn't text Mark. She didn't call Lily. She simply took a screenshot, filed it in a folder marked Clarity, then turned off her phone and picked up her crossword. Across the top of the page, 5 letters, Quiet, Victory. She smiled, wrote in the answer, Grace. By mid-morning, she made the call. Gina Holt's office, the receptionist chirped. "This is Joanne Tucker," she said, voice calm. "Tell Gina it's the librarian from Sycamore Middle. She'll remember." She did. Within the hour, Joanne was sitting across from her in a downtown Nashville office, a glassy space with the smell of lemon oil and fresh copier paper. Gina smiled, but it faded when she looked closer. "You look tired." "I've earned it," Joanne replied. I need to talk estate, now, while my mind is clear and my spine still works. Gina gestured to the conference table. Let's begin. They started with the basics. The will, drafted just after her husband's death 3 years earlier. At the time, Joanne had included Mark and Amber by default. Back then, she'd still believed in default family loyalty. She didn't anymore. Do you want to remove them completely? Gina asked, scanning the pages. Joanne didn't blink. Yes, and I want it airtight, ironclad. I don't want them contesting anything because I forgot to cross a T or dot a damn I. Gina gave a single nod, brisk and respectful. We can include a no contest clause. If they challenge it, they get nothing. Joanne smirked faintly. Perfect. They moved on to the power of attorney. Mark had been listed, again by tradition. Gina didn't have to ask why that needed to change. Natalie, Joanne said. She's the one sitting beside me during chemo, not watching me like a stranger from across the room. Gina typed, revised, printed. Then had Joanne sign the new documents. The click of the pen against paper sounded heavier than it should have, like justice being stapled into place. Over the next few hours, they tackled everything. Revoked Mark's access to financial and medical decisions. Shifted control of the house deed into a trust managed solely by Joanne. Moved the bulk of her savings to a separate account with Natalie as a secondary signer. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. At one point, Gina leaned back, tapping the end of her pen. Want to leave anything on record explaining the removal? Joanne thought about it, then nodded. One line, that's all. She took the pen and, in her clean librarian script, added to the bottom of the old will's revocation, removed due to cruelty during crisis. Gina read it, then whispered, cold. True, Joanne said. They finished just after 4 p.m., the Nashville skyline blinking to life behind the office windows. Gina placed all final paperwork into a navy blue binder, labeled it Legacy, and slid it across the table. You're not dying, Joanne, she said softly. You're just rearranging. Joanne smiled, dry and small. That's what librarians do best. That night, she set the binder on the side table next to her bed, poured herself a glass of water, and folded laundry like any other Wednesday. The quiet of her home felt less like emptiness now, more like clarity. As she went to lock the front door, she noticed something tucked into the mailbox. Not a bill, not junk. A square envelope with a glittery sticker sealing the back. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small bouquet of daisies and lavender, hand-picked, not store-bought. The stems were slightly damp, wrapped in a paper towel and foil. Tucked among the petals was a folded note card. On the front, a watercolor sun. Inside, Lily's handwriting, small but neat. You're the strongest woman I know. Joanne stared at the note, her eyes stinging. She pressed the card to her chest, just for a second. Just long enough. She didn't cry, but she did sit down on the porch with the flowers in her lap, watching the streetlights blink on, one by one. Her estate was no longer cluttered. Her heart, still full where it counted. The folding chairs were set up in a circle, cushioned with hand-knitted seat pads, and surrounded by walls painted a soft cream. It smelled like lemon cleaner and distant coffee, and somewhere in the back of the room, someone had lit a cinnamon candle that mixed strangely with the faint scent of hospital-grade sanitizer. Joanne sat near the window, watching the way the light filtered through the stained glass onto the carpet. She hadn't planned to speak, not the first day, but when the leader, a tall woman with silver curls and a nurse's badge that read Charlene, asked if anyone new wanted to share, Joanne surprised herself. She didn't need to rehearse. The truth rolled out plainly, calmly. My name's Joanne. I have stage 2 breast cancer. My treatment started last week. She paused. I told my family. My daughter-in-law laughed. My son watched her do it. There was no dramatic silence. Just a shift in the room, subtle but deep, like breath held all at once. I'm not here because I'm afraid to die, she continued. I'm here because I decided I don't want to heal near people who treat me like I'm disposable. One woman across from her, Delia, with cropped gray hair and paint still under her fingernails, covered her mouth with one hand. "That's not family," she whispered, voice trembling. "That's ego in a cardigan." The group let out a soft, collective laugh. Not mocking, just something between pain and agreement. After the session, Charlene handed her a small binder and said, "This is your copy of the care planner, but you'll want to customize it." Joanne took it home and did just that with Natalie's help. They spent Saturday morning at Joanne's kitchen table, which smelled like paper and vanilla creamer. Natalie flipped through labeled tabs: medical contacts, treatment plan, medication list, emergency protocols. Joanne had added a section labeled Lily, sealed with tape. "I'm making an if anything happens folder just for her," Joanne said, her voice steady. "Not for Mark, not for Amber." Natalie didn't question it. She just nodded, slid over another folder, and said, "Then let's make it bulletproof." They worked for hours. Everything was filed, cross-referenced, duplicated. Power of attorney papers, funeral preferences, passwords, even letters to be opened only under certain conditions. By the end of the day, Joanne's dining table looked like the command center of someone taking their life, every inch of it seriously. That evening, her phone buzzed. "Mark. Mark. Hey, you've been distant lately. Amber says she's hurt." Joanne stared at the screen for a long while, then set the phone down without replying. She watered the succulents on her windowsill, folded a towel, stirred a pot of lentil soup she'd made for herself. The quiet of her house didn't feel empty. It felt earned. When she picked the phone back up, she typed slowly, "Joanne. Tell her I'm alive, not interested in her funeral." She hit send and turned the phone face down, then returned to the binder and slid in the last tab. "Everything in its place," she said aloud, as if filing pain could be as methodical as shelving books. Across the room, her journal lay open. She'd written a single sentence earlier that morning. "They saw cancer. My friends saw me." Joanne closed the binder, clicked the latch shut, and placed it on the shelf above her desk. The cinnamon scent from church still lingered faintly in the threads of her cardigan. She didn't look back at her phone. She didn't need to. She knew how Amber would respond, if she responded at all. Either another sarcastic jab or a performance of injury too shallow to touch her. Joanne was done playing nurse to their feelings. From this point on, she would curate her support like she curated her estate, with precision, with clarity, and with no room for rot disguised as family. The attorney's downtown office was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and old wood. Joanne sat still, letting the weight of it settle over her shoulders. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt right. Like aligning a tilted picture frame after years of ignoring it. Gina slid the papers into a thick envelope and locked them in her briefcase. "I've added the no contest clause. If they try to dispute anything, they forfeit everything. No loopholes." Joanne nodded. "Good. Let it cost them more than silence ever did." Outside, the Nashville skyline blinked in the late afternoon sun. Autumn had painted the trees a brittle red. It had been nearly a month since her diagnosis, and her clarity had sharpened with every passing day, like her body, burning sick cells into smoke. They moved next to the trust. Lily's name was written in soft black ink. Alone on a clean line, the conditional trust would activate when she turned 21. No access through parents, no intermediaries. "She's the only one who's acted like blood," Joanne said. "And even then, it's not about blood." Gina leaned back in her chair. "Want to say anything about why Mark and Amber were removed?" Some people like to include a sentence. Joanne considered. "Just right. Excluded due to cruelty during crisis. That's enough." Later that week, Joanne stood in the attic, a dust mask covering her mouth. Light broke through slats in the wood, hitting boxes long unopened. Each was labeled in her late husband Alan's handwriting. Their wedding dishes, his record player, her mother's gold brooch, items that had once been earmarked for someday, but someday had a new shape now. She selected what mattered, what truly held meaning, and filled donation boxes for local women's shelters. Not out of spite, but out of purpose. These things didn't belong to some imagined future granddaughters-in-law. They belonged where they could matter now, not someday, not to Amber. She set aside Alan's reading lamp, a cracked but still beautiful porcelain piece. This one, she told Natalie later, goes to Lily. One day, Natalie had come by that Sunday with her camera and a strong cup of coffee. Together, they photographed each heirloom, cataloged what was going where, and logged the story behind each piece. "This isn't just for the will," Natalie said, snapping a photo of the chipped tea set Joanne used on holidays. "This is your dignity archive." Joanne smiled softly. "I like that, a dignity archive." By the end of the day, they had a full binder. Photos, notes, destinations. The physical remains of a life, stripped of obligation and weight, rearranged into meaning. In between sessions of legal filings and memory keeping, Joanne made one more call. A scholarship fund. The Alan Tucker Memorial Grant would provide a modest annual sum for first-generation college students pursuing library sciences. His favorite idea. His name would be honored. Amber and Mark's names were nowhere near it. As Joanne filled out the final paperwork, the afternoon light danced across her dining table, dappling the edge of her teacup. She didn't feel tired. She felt like someone who had finally put down a bag she'd carried too far. Later that evening, just as she finished labeling the final donation box for pickup, the doorbell rang. Joanne wiped her hands on a towel and opened the front door to a carefully curated tableau. Amber, standing in a pink cardigan, hair curled, smiling too wide. Mark stood behind her, holding a foil-covered casserole dish. Amber beamed like they were hosting Thanksgiving. "We brought dinner," Joanne blinked once, slowly, and glanced down at the food. Lasagna, judging by the faint smell of basil and cheese. She didn't reach for it. Instead, her eyes drifted back up, quiet and unreadable. Amber shifted slightly, the smile faltering just a touch, just enough to notice, and Joanne said nothing at all. Amber breezed in as if invited. "We thought you might like a home-cooked meal," she chirped, placing the dish on the counter. Mark followed, silent, his expression caught between guilt and confusion, like he wasn't sure if this counted as penance or obligation. Joanne closed the door behind them. "That was thoughtful," she said flatly, walking past them toward the kitchen. "But I've already eaten." Amber's smile faltered a fraction, then returned. "It's fine. It'll keep. We just wanted to stop by. Check in." "Things have been hectic." "Have they?" Joanne poured herself a glass of water, not offering them anything. Her hands were steady, her voice smoother than usual. If they noticed the calm, they didn't understand it. Mark cleared his throat. "We've been meaning to come by sooner. I just didn't know if you wanted visitors." "I didn't," Joanne said simply. She turned, letting that sentence hang like thick smoke in the room. Amber busied herself adjusting the foil on the lasagna, pretending she hadn't heard it. "We wanted to make up for how that day went," Amber said. "Too light, too bright. I didn't mean to come off the wrong way. It was emotional. You know how I get when I'm caught off guard." Joanne looked her straight in the eye. "No, I don't know how you get, but I know how I felt when you laughed at me." Amber's hand froze. She glanced at Mark, who stared hard at the floor. "It wasn't laughter at you," she insisted, voice thinning. "It was just shock. I didn't mean anything cruel." "You don't have to mean it for it to hurt," Joanne replied. "And Mark, you sat there and let it happen. I looked to you for even one word. And you said nothing." Mark opened his mouth, closed it. "I was in shock too. It was a lot." Joanne set her glass down. "You're grown adults. I came to you with news that could have shaken any family, and you responded with dismissal and silence. That told me everything I needed to know about who I could count on." Amber folded her arms. "So what? This is just over? You're writing us off because of one mistake?" It wasn't one, Joanne said. It was the most important moment, and you both failed it. No one spoke. The smell of the lasagna filled the space, rich and heavy, like something was burning even though the oven was off. Joanne wanted it out of her house. The food, the guilt, the pretense. Amber took a step back. Well, we tried. Joanne didn't move. No, you performed. Mark finally looked up, eyes clouded. Can we just talk sometime? Really talk? Joanne gave him the smallest nod. If you ever decide to start listening, you know where to find me. They left quietly, the sound of the door closing behind them far too soft for how loud the moment actually was. Joanne stood in the stillness, staring at the lasagna. It sat in the middle of the counter like a question she'd already answered. She peeled back the foil and scooped the first layer with a fork. Too salty, too oily. She didn't take a second bite. The dish went into the trash with the foil still warm. She washed the container, dried it meticulously, and set it on the front porch with no note, no sentiment, just removal. Later that evening, while folding laundry in the den, her phone buzzed. A message from Lily. Lily, they're acting like nothing happened. Like it's all fixed now. Joanne stared at the message. Her thumbs hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed, Joanne, that's how some people handle guilt. They wrap it in pasta and hope you choke on politeness. She hit send. The next morning, a friend forwarded her a screenshot from Amber's social media. There Amber was, beaming in a photo taken just outside Joanne's porch, holding the empty dish as if she'd fed the heart of the family back to life. Mark stood behind her with a forced grin. The caption read, Family Dinner Night. Healing stronger together. Joanne didn't respond. She didn't message. She didn't rage. She printed the photo, placed it neatly into the folder with her estate revisions, and labeled it Fiction. Then she made herself tea, strong, clean, and silent. Joanne's inbox popped, just as she was labeling a folder Advanced Directives, Final. She wiped her hands on her slacks and clicked the message open. It was from Gwen Halpern, an old church acquaintance she hadn't spoken to in years. Subject, You seeing this? Attached was a screenshot of a social media post, Amber's account. Caption, Family dinner night, nothing like healing over home-cooked meals. Grace. Together again. There was no photo, just words. Joanne didn't blink. She simply dragged the image into her desktop folder titled Documented Misrepresentation. Then, with steady fingers, she opened her printer queue and let the machine hum to life. Once the printout landed on her desk, she used a fine-tip pen to add the time, date, and source. Another line in the record, another note in the log. Not out of spite, out of clarity. That same afternoon, Joanne opened a blank WordPress template and typed 4 words at the top. Between chemo and clarity. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't for likes. It was for truth. Her first post was titled, Silence is a Sentence Too. In it, she detailed how illness reveals not just biology, but the architecture of every relationship. Some people show up with soup, some show up with sarcasm, and some don't show up at all. She never named names. That wasn't her style. She simply described the silence, the absence, and the performance of care that came too late and too loudly. The blog began quietly. 12 readers, then 24, then 60, then 300. Comments poured in from strangers who said they felt less alone, that her words peeled back something they hadn't been able to say themselves. And then, as expected, the text came in. Amber. This blog. People are making assumptions. About us. Joanne waited a full hour before replying. Joanne. If the shoe fits, take it off. No further messages followed. The next morning, she met Gina for tea at a quiet spot near the riverfront. I want to copyright the blog, Joanne said calmly. Gina raised her brows. You're going public, not with names, but with clarity. My story deserves legal boundaries too. Gina leaned back, nodded once. Then I'll handle the paperwork. And I'd suggest selecting a few key posts to submit for publication while we're at it, just in case you want to widen the reach later. Joanne smiled. I already have my favorites bookmarked. By the end of the week, she had 3 posts filed under U.S. copyright law, edited, backed up, and registered under her name. And the blog's traffic kept growing. One morning, Lily slipped a folded sheet of notebook paper into her mailbox with a heart drawn on the back. Grandma, your words are like a flashlight in a dark room. I hope you never stop. Joanne tucked the note into her journal, between the page where she first wrote "no more" and the one where she crossed out Amber and Mark's names in her original will. 2 days later, a formal envelope arrived. Thick cardstock, golden seal. Inside was a letter from the regional chapter of the Cancer Survivors Network. They'd read her blog. They wanted her to speak. Joanne sat down at her kitchen table, the letters spread out before her, the edges curling from her grip. She thought about everything they'd tried to stage online, everything she'd dismantled quietly, post by post. She reached for her pen and wrote 2 words on a fresh notepad. Say yes. Then she stood up, filled the kettle, and let the silence of her home feel like strength instead of loneliness. Her story no longer belonged to those who faked redemption. It belonged to the ones who needed truth. Joanne stood behind the podium with both hands resting on its edges, not gripping, not shaking, just steady. A glass of water sat untouched beside her notes, which she hadn't looked at once since the MC introduced her as a writer-survivor, bots and speaker of quiet truths. The event hall wasn't grand. Folding chairs, modest lighting, and the faint aroma of catered sandwiches from the back table. But the people gathered in that space were the kind who knew what hard news tasted like. Chemo had dulled their taste buds, but sharpened their souls. I was diagnosed on a Tuesday, Joanne began, her voice clear, measured. By Wednesday, someone I loved laughed. A collective stillness swept over the room. Not shock, recognition. She paused. They weren't trying to be cruel, not on purpose, but I learned that cruelty doesn't always arrive in shouts. Sometimes, it walks in on polite heels and asks for dinner. Light chuckles rose, dry, knowing. Joanne's lips barely curved, but her eyes were lit from inside. She didn't need drama. She had truth. Natalie, sitting 2 rows from the front, hit record on her phone without blinking. Behind her, survivors nodded, some wiping under their glasses, others scribbling notes. One woman mouthed, "Yes." At home, Lily watched from her iPad in her bedroom, door shut tight. The livestream hadn't been advertised widely, but Joanne had slipped her the link the night before, with a short note. In case you want to know what strength sounds like. Midway through, Joanne leaned slightly forward and said, "Some people posed for pictures beside my struggle, but I walked it alone, and I don't regret a single step without them." Across town, Amber posted a filtered photo of herself wearing pink and holding a mug labeled "Fighter." The caption read, "Family illness journeys are hard, but we grow stronger through them. Ha, blessed, harka, grateful." When the post hit social media, Joanne's phone buzzed with screenshots from 3 different people. She didn't even open them. She just lifted her chin a little higher, finished her final line on stage, and stepped down to a standing ovation. That night, still in her slacks and blouse, she sat at her desk and composed a single line for her blog. Some people walk the journey, others take selfies on the path. The post went live at 10:14 p.m. It hit 4,000 shares by morning. 2 days later, the Nashville Observer ran a Sunday feature under the title, "From Chemo to Clarity, One Woman's Fight for Dignity After Diagnosis." Her name was on the cover. Inside was a 2-page spread with an excerpt from her blog, a black and white photo of Joanne in her garden, and an interview where she said, "Healing doesn't always mean reconciling. Sometimes it means protecting what's left." Meanwhile, Gina called from her office that afternoon. "It's done," she said, voice crisp but satisfied. "Every asset has been shifted. Power of attorney, medical proxy, house title, financial instruments. They can't touch a thing. Joanne let out a slow breath, letting it fill the kitchen's quiet. Thank you, Gina. I also registered your book outline as a literary property, she added, in case you ever want to take it further. I just might, Joanne replied, almost smiling. Almost. Later that week, she stood barefoot on her porch, the same one Amber once posed on, and listened to the sound of wind dragging dry leaves across the cement. Autumn was coming early this year. The sky above was low and pale, and the air held that familiar, clean crispness that whispered change. The doorbell didn't ring. The phone didn't buzz. No one was trying to intrude. And then one evening, after she returned from a quiet dinner with Natalie, Joanne stepped into the bathroom, bent over the sink, and caught her reflection, hair growing back in soft patches, eyes no longer dulled by steroids or fatigue. She placed one hand gently on her collarbone, just above where the chemo port had once been. Gone. She called Natalie. The doctor called. And they can't find anything. I'm clear. There was a long pause, then Natalie's voice cracked slightly. Quiet remission. Quiet, Joanne confirmed. And permanent, if I have anything to say about it. She walked outside, barefoot again, and let the cold concrete press into her soles. Her body might have been a battlefield, but it was hers again. She turned her face toward the wind and didn't speak. She didn't need to. There was nothing left to announce. The bell was small, brass, and bolted to the pale blue wall outside the infusion suite. A nurse stood beside Joanne with a tissue in one hand and a clipboard in the other, smiling gently as she nodded. You ready, Ms. Tucker? Joanne nodded once. No tears, no theatrics. Just the quiet pride of someone who had walked through fire and come out tempered. She reached out, fingers firm, and rang the bell 3 times. The sound echoed down the hallway, crisp and clean, like a chapel chime in a town that didn't need religion to understand reverence. The nurses clapped softly. A few fellow patients smiled from their chairs, thin blankets tucked over legs. Joanne offered a gracious nod and adjusted the scarf around her neck. She had chosen not to invite anyone, and no one had asked. No flowers, no balloons, no Amber, no Mark. Outside, the autumn air sliced clean across her cheeks. Nashville's wind was picking up again, tugging at the leaves like it had secrets to tell. Joanne walked slowly to her car, the chemo center behind her. Her keys felt lighter in her palm. She was going home. That evening, she opened the mailbox and found a small padded envelope addressed in careful, looping cursive. Inside was a handmade card. Construction paper, glitter glue, a red heart with slightly uneven edges. Inside, Lily had written, "You beat it, but you were always stronger than it. I love you, Grandma." Joanne didn't cry. She didn't need to. She placed the card in a shadow box and hung it on her bedroom wall above the dresser, right where her wedding photo used to be. The next morning, she met Gina at the firm downtown. Gina was already flipping through legal folders with a red pen in hand and reading glasses halfway down her nose. "We're adding a clause," Joanne said, her tone composed. Gina looked up. "Go on." Joanne slid a single sheet forward. Typed, sharp, intentional. "In the event of my death, Mark Tucker and Amber Tucker are not to be notified. No funeral invitations, no estate involvement, no contact initiated." Gina read it twice, then nodded. "We'll make it ironclad." After they signed, Gina pulled a small bottle of champagne from her office mini-fridge. She poured 2 glasses and raised one. "To survival," she said, "and silence." Joanne clinked her glass gently, the only kind that lasts. Back home, the blog was evolving. What started as Between Chemo and Clarity had gained thousands of readers. Joanne's entries, honest, unflinching, never vindictive, had turned into something more than reflection. They were blueprints. She wrote not about pain, but about reclaiming space. She spoke not of illness, but of boundaries sharpened by betrayal. A small indie publisher based in Chicago reached out through the blog's contact form. They wanted to turn her writing into a book. Joanne didn't hesitate. She chose the title herself, Chemo and Clarity. The subtitle was simple: What Survived Me Deserved Me. By winter, the book had hit regional shelves. Then came a podcast feature, hosted by a breast cancer survivor with a national following. The episode went viral. Today's guest is Joanne Tucker, the host had said. She doesn't just talk about cancer. She talks about what it reveals and who it reveals. Emails poured in. Strangers shared their stories. Some sent thanks. Some sent silence. Finally broken, Joanne responded to every message herself. But not all the messages were kind. A certified letter arrived one Thursday morning, slid under her door by the mail carrier. Joanne opened it slowly, careful not to rip the envelope. At the top, cease and desist from Amber Tucker claiming defamation. Emotional distress. Public mischaracterization. The letter was 3 pages of legalese wrapped around insecurity. Joanne exhaled, slow and even. Then she picked up the phone. "Gina," she said, "we've got mail." 2 days later, Gina sent back a memo with bullet points, legal citations, and one glorious line: "She has no grounds." In fact, we have counterclaims ready if she escalates. But it didn't end there, because Amber, in a desperate attempt to regain control, had copied the letter to Joanne's publisher. What she didn't know, what she hadn't cared enough to check, was that the publishing house was founded by 3 estranged sisters who built their entire imprint around women reclaiming voice after betrayal. The publisher released a statement within 24 hours. "We stand by Joanne Tucker and her story. We believe in the truth. And we believe in the power of walking away." Joanne received a second letter the following week. This one wasn't a threat. It was an offer: speaking engagements, media interest, translation rights. She placed both envelopes side by side on her desk, the cease and desist, and the invitation, and then she reached for the recycle bin. One went in, one stayed, because some paper belongs in history, and some just deserves to burn. Joanne held the cease and desist letter up to the window light, like she was inspecting a counterfeit bill. The watermark was real. The tone, familiar, frilly with legal threat, but hollow at the core. She ran a fingertip over the signature at the bottom. Amber's name, in blue ink, curved and forceful. She didn't laugh, didn't fume. She simply picked up her phone and called Gina. "Got a moment?" she asked. "For you?" Gina replied. "Always. Let me guess. It's written in Narcissist?" Joanne allowed herself a dry smile. Front and back. Gina met her an hour later with a stack of folders, a sleek laptop, and a brow already arched. She read the letter aloud once, then again silently, pen tapping the table. "She has no case," Gina said flatly. "But you do." Joanne raised an eyebrow. "Attempted intimidation, public misrepresentation. You've been careful, strategic, and private. She can't claim damages over a mirror held up to her own behavior." Joanne exhaled, slow and steady. "Good, because I'm done being quiet." That night, she posted a new blog entry titled, "Dear Cease, Consider Yourself Desisted." She didn't name Amber. She didn't have to. She included the letter, redacted for identifiers, but unflinching in its tone. She added commentary only once. "This is what shame looks like when you don't own it. It arrives dressed as paperwork." The response was immediate. Hundreds of comments poured in within hours. Cancer survivors, estranged mothers, women who had been laughed at, ignored, silenced, dismissed. The post was shared across forums, support groups, even a legal subreddit. One woman wrote, "I didn't know I was allowed to protect myself from my own daughter. Thank you." Another, "This is why people stop trusting family, and why they learn to trust themselves instead." Joanne read every message, eyes scanning slowly, absorbing every name and story. Some were typed in fury, others in quiet confession. And somewhere between the lines, she realized she wasn't alone, not in her grief or her choices. The doorbell rang the next afternoon. Lily stood on the porch, alone, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Joanne's waist. Joanne froze, startled by the sudden weight of warmth. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly, fingers grazing Lily's back. "I just needed to be here," Lily said into her sweater. "They don't talk about it. They act like it didn't happen. But you didn't pretend." Joanne's throat tightened. Lily looked up. "You're my real home." That did it. Weeks of measured silence cracked open in her chest. Joanne's eyes filled. And for the first time since the diagnosis, the betrayal, and the rebuilding, she cried. Not from weakness, not from fear, but from release. The tears were warm, almost grateful, as if her body finally believed she had made it through. She held Lily tighter and whispered, "Thank you for coming." They spent the afternoon making soup, flipping through old photo albums, and laughing at Lily's childhood drawings. It was ordinary, which made it sacred. Later that evening, Joanne got a text from Natalie with a link. It was a news alert. Amber Tucker terminated from Emerson Events Katsuran in Rasahar. Internal investigation cites ethics concerns. No lawsuit, no headline scandal. Just a quiet professional door closing behind a woman who had tried to weaponize image and failed. Joanne didn't forward the article. She didn't gloat or screenshot it for posterity. She just poured herself a cup of tea, opened her laptop, and began drafting her next blog entry. This one was titled, "When Paper Cuts Back." Because shame, when thrown hard enough, comes back as confetti, and Joanne had finally learned how to celebrate. The pen in Joanne's hand didn't tremble as she signed the final line of her revised legacy binder. Gina sat across the table, tapping her manicured nail against a checklist, nodding slowly with approval. "That's it," Gina said, slipping the documents into a crisp navy folder. "Scholarship finalized. Trust locked. Estate airtight. They're out, permanently." Joanne leaned back in her chair, exhaling through her nose. Not relief exactly, but something deeper. Resolution. "I hope they never read a word of it," she said. "But if they do, I want them to feel it in their bones." The scholarship, named after her late husband, Henry Tucker, would support students pursuing careers in public education, something Amber had once dismissed as thankless work. Joanne made sure the dedication read clearly, "For those who build, not those who take." Her memoir, Chemo and Clarity, had gone into its second print run the week before. Gina handed her the updated royalties summary. Joanne glanced at the number and folded the paper without a word. Amber had tried clawing her way back into digital sympathy. A post about healing from fractured families was accompanied by a black and white photo of a tree-lined street and a caption that read, "Some things you just have to forgive, even if they never apologize." The comments were brutal. Most people weren't buying it. "She's trying to be the victim in a story she helped write," Joanne muttered, closing the screen. "Let her choke on her own fiction." Later that afternoon, a short, flat email came through from Mark. Subject: "I'm sorry. I know I didn't say anything when I should have. I know I didn't stop her. I just didn't want to make it worse. I miss you." Mark Joanne read it twice, then clicked reply. She didn't type a word. Instead, she attached a PDF, official notice of irrevocable disinheritance, and hit send. No subject, no message body. The document spoke for itself. That evening, Lily called, breathless with excitement. She had been accepted into an early admission program at the Nashville School for the Arts. "They want me to start with the fall intensive," she squealed. "There's a real stage, Grandma. With lights and sets and everything." Joanne smiled into the receiver. "Then I guess we better make sure you've got proper shoes." When Lily hesitated, Joanne cut her off gently. "It's already handled. Your tuition, your supplies, your peace of mind," Lily whispered. "I love you." And Joanne answered with, "Make something beautiful with the life you've earned." That night she sat on her porch, the light from the front window spilling onto her lap. The air was cool and smelled faintly of the honeysuckle bush she'd planted last year. A journal lay open beside her, an untouched glass of tea sweating on the armrest. She had just begun to write when a dark sedan pulled into the driveway. Headlights off, slow and deliberate. Her fingers tightened slightly on her pen. The door opened, and Mark stepped out alone. He didn't bring Amber. He didn't bring food. He didn't bring excuses. He just walked slowly toward the steps, shoulders slightly slumped, hands hanging limp by his sides, as if unsure whether he was there to speak or just be seen. Joanne didn't move. She didn't close the journal. She didn't call his name. She simply waited, stone still, as the man who once called her mom stood at the bottom of her porch and looked up, like someone finally realizing the door may not open for them again. "I messed up," Mark finally said. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it all day. "I should have said something that day." Joanne didn't move. "You did," she said quietly, just not with words. He winced. The truth had always landed heavier in this house than any raised voice. "I didn't think it would get this bad," he tried. Amber, she was stressed. Joanne raised a brow, slow and unimpressed. Stress doesn't manufacture cruelty. It only reveals it. Mark shifted his weight, looked everywhere but at her. The sunlight slanted through the curtains, dust particles floating between them like suspended accusations. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You don't," she replied. "You just carry it." He looked up, startled. "What?" "You asked what you could do," she continued, her tone even, measured. "You can remember what it feels like when someone laughs at something you survive. And next time, when it's someone else, you speak." Mark opened his mouth, closed it again. He wasn't used to silence being louder than apology. "I miss Dad," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He would have known what to say. Joanne's expression softened for half a second, just long enough to flash with grief, then closed again like a book snapped shut. "Your father loved you, but he would not have excused this." The quiet stretched thin. Mark looked down at his shoes, then slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I've been in therapy," he offered, trying to understand why I stood there and let it happen. Joanne didn't take the paper. "Therapy is a good start," she said. "But don't hand me your work and call it healing." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I guess I just hoped you might forgive you," she interrupted. His silence was answer enough. "I'm not angry with you, Mark," she said. "But you and we're not rebuilding anything. This isn't a clean slate. It's closure." Mark took a small step back, as if something inside him had just accepted terms it didn't agree to. "So, that's it?" "That's peace," she said. "And sometimes it's quiet. Like now." Joanne moved toward the kitchen without waiting for goodbye. The visit had ended, even if he was still standing in it. Mark lingered a moment longer, then turned and let himself out. The screen door clicked gently behind him. Joanne didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply stood at the sink, looking out at her garden, her hands resting on the counter like anchors. The rosemary bush had begun to bloom again. She would clip a sprig later, maybe dry it for Lily's next visit. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A new email from Gina Holt. Subject: Chemo and Clarity Royalties. Body: We've crossed $100,000. The charitable trust is officially active. Joanne exhaled slowly, her lips parting in something close to a smile. Not joy, not triumph. Just the solid, earned breath of a woman who had rewritten her ending and made sure it stayed hers. The pen hovered over the page for several long seconds before Joanne pressed it down. She wrote, Lily Tucker, granddaughter, artist, cycle breaker, family. That was the only name under the survived by line in the obituary draft. No mention of Mark. No trace of Amber. The decision wasn't vindictive. It was protective. Joanne had lived long enough to understand that silence could be sanctuary, and this was her final boundary in ink. The paper rested beside her cup of mint tea, still steaming on the breakfast table of her new home. Smaller, yes, but bathed in natural light. Windows on every wall, soft rugs on warm hardwood, and shelves filled only with things she loved. There were no echoing hallways or closed doors. Just open air and peace. A photo of Lily rested near the window. She'd drawn herself as a tree, roots deep, branches reaching. In the margins, she'd written, "Thank you for being soil." Joanne tucked the obituary into a labeled folder, slid it into her legacy chest, and turned to the next task, the writing grant. She'd been thinking about it for months. A small fund for women estranged from families during illness, loss, or abuse. The world didn't give them a name, but she could give them a voice. Gina helped file the paperwork. "What do you want to call it?" Joanne paused, then said, "The Pen Stays, grant for women who had to write their own endings." By week's end, it was official. The move came next. Her bungalow in East Nashville had a wraparound porch and flower boxes she could fill with lavender and thyme. She hung a wind chime made from silver spoons, not for sentiment, but because they sounded soft and certain, like music that didn't ask permission. On the first morning in her new home, Joanne left a letter on Lily's favorite seat by the window. "You broke the cycle. You heard silence and still chose to speak kindness. That makes you the beginning of something, not the continuation of anything. I love you more than all the things I had to unlove to protect you." She didn't need to say more. 2 Sundays later, Natalie hosted a survivors' brunch at the church fellowship hall. The room smelled of biscuits and strong coffee, and the air was thick with laughter that had been earned. Dozens of women filled the folding chairs, some bald, some scarred, some still healing, all alive. Joanne was asked to speak again. She hadn't planned to, but when she rose, the words came naturally. She didn't preach. She didn't name names. She told the truth. "I used to think family was blood," she said, looking out at the crowd. "Then blood walked away while strangers brought casseroles and courage. So I rewrote the definition. Turns out family is who stays when it gets inconvenient." Silence followed. A silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. After the event, as people packed away chairs and refilled their to-go mugs, a woman approached Joanne with trembling hands. Mid-50s, gray-streaked hair, tear-tracked cheeks. "My daughter stopped speaking to me when I started chemo," she whispered. "Said I was too needy. Said it made her feel drained." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was the only one." Joanne took her hands gently. "You weren't." The woman hugged her, not tightly but deeply, like someone laying down a burden after years of carrying it alone. Back at home, Joanne lit a candle on the windowsill. The sky had turned a pale peach, the last of summer clinging to the air. She sat on the porch with her journal and a glass of peach tea, content to let the silence stretch. Then her phone buzzed. Subject: production inquiry, chemo and clarity, body. "We'd like to explore adapting your memoir into a television series. Would you be open to a conversation?" Joanne blinked, set the glass down, and smiled. Not for the attention, but for the irony. They had mocked her illness. She had rewritten the narrative. Now the world wanted to read it out loud. Joanne toured a cancer center. The automatic doors whooshed open with a soft hum as Joanne stepped into the new wing of the Nashville Oncology Wellness Center. The smell of fresh paint lingered faintly in the air, mingled with the crisp scent of eucalyptus from the therapy room nearby. The lighting was soft, not sterile, but warm, like a sunrise had been captured and tucked into every bulb. She walked slowly, cane in hand, not from weakness anymore, but from memory. Her name was etched in bronze on the wall just outside the resource library. Joanne Tucker, for the ones who survived spite. Her eyes didn't tear up. She'd done that already years ago. Instead, she smiled the kind of smile that made people pause. It wasn't wide. It wasn't showy. It was satisfied. You okay? The coordinator asked, standing beside her, clipboard in hand. I'm more than okay, Joanne replied, brushing her fingers across the plaque. I'm seen. The tour moved along, but she stayed behind for a moment, watching, breathing, absorbing. This place had bookshelves stocked with memoirs, chairs built for comfort, and an art therapy studio funded in part by the sales from her book, Chemo and Clarity. She had insisted the walls be covered in local artists' work, not sterile stock photos. The center wasn't just about surviving, it was about healing with dignity. Later that afternoon, the front door of Joanne's bungalow opened to the familiar creak of aging hinges and the rush of late autumn air. Lily stepped inside, her messenger bag slung across her shoulder, cheeks pink from the cold. Grandma, she beamed, I brought it. Joanne had barely sat down before Lily unzipped her bag and pulled out her latest portfolio, charcoal drawings layered with soft washes of watercolor. One was a sketch of Joanne, sitting at her kitchen table, pen in hand, tea beside her. Another was abstract, tangled branches slowly unraveling toward the light. I call this one unrooted, Lily said softly, because sometimes we have to leave the soil we were born in. Joanne's throat tightened. She reached for the edge of the page, smoothing it gently. You are what I leave behind, she said. Not them. You. Lily blinked quickly, trying to hide it. But she didn't look away. That night, as the tea steeped and the quiet wrapped around them like a shawl, Gina arrived holding a thick, leather-bound folder in one hand and a bottle of sparkling cider in the other. It's done, she said, handing over the binder. Final trust filings, royalties, grant disbursements, everything. You've outlived every lie they told about you. Joanne took it carefully, almost reverently, and set it on the table with the same care she'd once reserved for her late husband's medical bills or the first pages of Lily's childhood journals. Thank you, she said, for seeing this through with me. Gina popped the cork, and the soft fizz filled the room. She poured 2 glasses and raised hers slightly. To what they couldn't take, Gina said. Joanne clinked hers gently against it. To what I never gave. They drank without fanfare, just 2 women in a kitchen layered with memory and hard-earned peace. The wind rattled faintly outside, and from the living room, Lily played soft music on her tablet, jazz, low and wandering. The world outside didn't matter, not in this moment. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed and shelved, Joanne padded barefoot to the front door to check the mail. There was only one envelope, cream-colored, hand-addressed, but no name, no return address. She opened it slowly, cautious without being alarmed. Inside was a single card, plain, no logo, no decoration, just a handwritten line. You were right. Joanne stared at it for a long time, fingers resting on the edge of the cardstock. The penmanship wasn't familiar, too careful to be Mark, too restrained to be Amber. But the message was clear. Regret had found its way back, not loud, not seeking forgiveness, just acknowledgement. She didn't smile, she didn't cry. She simply turned the card over, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Like a record, like a receipt. The auditorium lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd like a soft curtain. Joanne sat in the 3rd row, center aisle, her hand resting lightly on Natalie's sleeve. The metal armrests were cold beneath her skin, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were on the stage, on the girl standing there, poised and glowing in her burgundy orientation sash. Lily. Her curls were pinned back in a way that made her look older, but her nervous smile still belonged to the child who once sketched flowers in the margins of church bulletins. Joanne had seen every version of her granddaughter, quiet, gentle, unsure, and now she was seeing a new one, steady. As the university dean stepped up to the microphone, applause filled the room. Joanne joined, slow and even, pride blooming in her chest like something earned. Before we close, the dean said, I'd like to share a quote from one of our scholarship contributors. It comes from a book that found its way into many hearts. He paused, letting the screen behind him light up with words that Joanne knew by memory. Sometimes your bloodline ends with betrayal, but your legacy begins with love. Chemo and Clarity. Joanne Tucker. There was a flicker of recognition in the room, murmurs, a few audible gasps. But Joanne didn't flinch. Natalie squeezed her arm once, a gesture that said, "They know now, and they see you." When the program ended, the crowd spilled out into the crisp fall air. Students posed with their parents, the clicking of phone cameras filling the spaces between conversations. Lily wove through the crowd toward Joanne, her face flushed with excitement and nerves. "I didn't know they were going to use your quote," Lily said, eyes bright. "You didn't tell me." Joanne brushed a stray hair from Lily's cheek. "I wanted you to hear it first. In your world, not mine." Lily hugged her hard, the kind of hug that didn't ask for anything, only offered warmth. "You made it all the way here." "No," Joanne whispered. "You made it all the way here. I just cleared the path." The walk home from the campus was short, just under a mile. Joanne insisted they skip the rideshare, despite Natalie's raised eyebrow. She wanted to feel the sidewalks again. Wanted to count the porch lights turning on one by one as the sun dipped behind the Nashville skyline. She arrived at her bungalow just as dusk settled, the windows glowing amber. The smell of basil and lemon from her small kitchen garden still lingered faintly on the breeze. Inside, she slipped off her shoes, hung up her sweater, and moved toward the dining table, where one last manila folder sat waiting. It had been there for weeks, untouched, unhurried. She picked it up now and laid it gently in the locked cabinet by the window. Her legacy was no longer a plan. It was a reality. She brewed a cup of tea, black, with a slice of dried orange and a touch of honey, and carried it to the sunroom. The armchair creaked softly as she sat. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes rang low and lazy. Joanne opened her final journal, the one she'd only used sparingly, and flipped to the last page. Her pen moved with quiet certainty. "I survived twice, once from cancer, once from cruelty. Neither defines me now." She closed the book, placed it on the small table beside her, and let herself lean back. No more explanations, no more apologies for choosing herself. She had rewritten not just a will or a trust, but the entire shape of her story. The scars didn't sting anymore. They didn't need to. They were proof she had been both wounded and healed. Outside, the porch light clicked on. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. "When I was diagnosed with cancer, my daughter-in-law laughed in front of my son, so I cut them out of my life, and healed in peace they'll never touch.